It's been, just absolutely merciless amounts of work.
Well,
So,
you sure have been pumping out those international notices.
right. And my intention there is to create a body of work so that everybody can see what we're doing in a very transparent fashion. They can see what we're doing, what we're saying, why we're doing it. Um, and hopefully that record established will be very handy in the not so distant future because we want to draw a line between our country and what the corporations do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, there's a huge distinction because we are living and they're not.
Right, there is a huge distinction. And, the misconduct and corruption and greed and um, other undue influences that are now guiding these corporations should not reflect upon our country. It should not be mistaken for actions of our country. Uh, this confusion, this deliberate attempt to um, basically steal our identity and impersonate us has consequences.
Hmm.
And if the rest of the world doesn't know, then the rest of the world blames us for what these private foreign corporations do. So,
Right.
we have to be very upfront and very forward and say no, because if we don't, we're going to be on the receiving end of retaliation for what these corporations have done in our names. And so it's a matter of objecting to what they're doing and making it clear that we are not behind this. And so the world at large has um, a gauge. They have warning. They have the information they need to respond appropriately. And
Right.
so, I don't know how many people are really aware of this, but Joe Biden has been playing around again, not just with the proxy war in Ukraine, but actually deploying U.S. resources to assist the Ukrainians in bombing Russian civilians inside Russia. And I'm sure that most people realize that if you aid and abet an enemy in time of war, then you become an accomplice, just like a crime, except that you become an enemy at war. Okay? So Joe Biden has crossed the line. He's crossed it twice now. Once with the attack on the Russian over the horizon radar station, and once with the attack on the civilians of Sevastopol. And, an attack against civilians inside the borders of Russia, there can be no doubt that's an act of war if it is actually an army
Mm.
or an air force. But what we have instead is a commercial corporation being manipulated and directed by a municipal corporation to some extent. And both of these entities, by virtue of what they are not our government, and they are misrepresenting our government, and they are not following their contract. So they're in violation of their contract. They are also abusing our Title IV flag, which was given to them when they are in pursuit of exercising delegated duties. So basically, these corporations are the ones stepping over the line. These corporations are the ones that are fighting the proxy war. These corporations are the ones that are independent of their contract with us, which mandates only defense of this country. They're going out and they're doing all of these mercenary war for profit scenarios and engaging in all of these conflicts in our name. And of course, this is criminal activity. This is not political. This is not religious. This is not racial. This is nothing but pure old-fashioned robbery and violence and theft and mercenary conflicts that these corporations are engendering and profiting from, and stripping our assets and using our people as cheap mercenaries to accomplish. So, people look at this, and those who don't quite understand it think that, oh, I'm a traitor to my country, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not. I'm trying to save my country from being invaded. I'm trying to save my country from being attacked by air, land, and sea. I'm trying to save my country from having its reputation totally trashed, having its resources stolen, and having its sons and daughters murdered as cheap mercenaries in foreign countries. And this is what we have been suffering for 160 years. America hasn't been heard from. And so now today, America, the great silent majority, the real militia, is standing up and saying, hell no. We have had an alliance with Russia since 1858, and we have never breached that peace. There is no reason to breach it now. And anybody who is endangering that treaty relationship is a traitor. Anyone in any position of trust, any board of trustees, any board of governors, any board of anything, anyone in any position representing us, or rather misrepresenting us, and offering to attack Russia, that is, fail to operate and fail to honor our treaties with Russia, is acting in treason. So there is no doubt in my mind, and there should be no doubt in yours, that what the Biden administration is allowing, and obviously what Mr. Trump has got his fingers into too, is not something that this country should be backing in any way, shape, or form. The proxy war in Ukraine has already cost $430 billion straight out of the pockets of Americans, most of which has been recycled to political cronies, by the way, and into the arms industry. And it has not really benefited anyone. It's just been the cause of more death, destruction, and misery for living people like you and me. So it's time that we put our foot down. It's time we put our foot down hard. And we've done that. We have made it very clear that we do not back either one of these corporations. They are not representing us in this matter. They are acting as criminals in violation of our treaties. They're abusing our Title IV wartime flag, and they are failing to do their job. As far as we're concerned, they're a criminal and rogue interest in the world, and they have gone over the border, so to speak. They have crossed the line, and all the nations should be responding by viewing this action as criminal. They want us to view it as political, but it's not political. It's commercial. It's driven by greed and profit motives. Has nothing to do with politics, has nothing to do with communism or not, has nothing to do with any kind of racial or ethnic issue. It's just pure, unadulterated mercenary activity that's unlawful, illegal, and immoral. So we've drawn a line. We've said, no, the Americans aren't backing this. And the Americans are not going to go to war over this. These corporations are rogue, and they are not doing their job for us, and they are in direct conflict with their own constitutions. The constitutions which created them and which gave them life and contract and which have supported them all of these years, they are violating with impunity because those contracts created them and assigned them one specific duty with respect to our militia and our country, and that is to defend this country. I mean, take out your pen, draw the border around the portions of landmass that are to be protected, and it's pretty darn obvious that they have been, contrary to that, they've been all over the fricking world with 950 military bases. They've been charging those expenses to us and to other victims of this god-awful fraud scheme. And they've just been running all over the world rampantly as thugs, as criminals, attacking other countries just whenever they felt like taking something. They've been using phony money and fraud of all kinds to benefit themselves at everybody else's expense. And that includes us. They have been bilking their employers sideways for 4 generations at least, with no excuse, no war. It was always a mercenary conflict. And so all of this is highly illegal, all of it's criminal, and these people have got to be stopped. And we're the ones to stop them. We're the ones that have to raise our voice and say, no, no, this is it, no. Cut off their supplies of money. They have no assets from us. They have nothing backing them from us. They have no credit extended from us to pursue this course. And so, they may not like it, but it's long, long, long overdue. If we had done this right after the Civil War, we wouldn't be looking at this situation. If we had done it before or after the First World War, we wouldn't be looking at this situation. If we had even done it after the Second World War, we wouldn't be looking at this situation. But what it is now is that we have criminal commercial corporations rampaging wildly all over the world, creating nothing but death and destruction in their path. They are like locusts that come into a country and eat it from the inside out. Then they blame the victims and go to the next victim. Just like a parasite moving from host to host to host. And you can track its progress. You can see how it has moved over the course of history, steadily westward from its origins in the Middle East. It has moved every few hundred years, it moves. And it's moving more quickly now simply because the pace of life and communication and everything else is faster. But they have been nothing but bad news for everybody, always, throughout the entirety of their existence. So we have said, no, we don't support Joe Biden or his corporation. No, we do not support Donald Trump or his corporation. I think one of the things that people have been confused about for many years is the fact that they think that the U.S. capital A Army is our army, and it's not. You know, just the idea that Derek Johnson, or yes, this is his name, Derek. Yes, it is Johnson.
Yeah, Derek Johnson.
Just the idea that he's promoting that the army has the right to come in and take a charge of a rotten political situation. Well, the militia has the right to come in and clean up a bad political position. Yes, it is true. We do have that right. We can do it. However, the U.S. Army is not our militia.
It's another corporation.
It's another corporation. It's under contract. It's a foreign for-hire mercenary force that is out of control, that has lied to us, lied about us, and has been asset stripping this country for 160 years. And people are mistaking this for-hire military for our militia. It was our militia that took to the field in 1775. It was our militia that won the War of Independence by force of arms and gained the land and soil of this country. It was not the U.S. Army or any other form of for-hire military service. And so I want to remind everyone of that. There's an apples and oranges distinction here between the militia, which operates independently and which is not for hire, and which is made up of our own people, versus a bought and paid for, whether they are loyal or not, but bought and paid for hire mercenary service that's supposed to be defending us and clearly isn't. They should be here defending our border. Instead, they're causing trouble in Ukraine, and everyone is blaming us for it when we don't have a thing to do with it.
Well, you have put out the call for extraterritorial force for the criminals to be arrested and hauled in to be held accountable. Have we gotten any traction with that?
Yes, but on the other hand, the real problem is that they're failing to cut these corporations off at the noogies. The thing is that you can remove however many CEOs and however many members of a board of governors or a board of trustees, but if you don't get to the root of the problem, if you don't destroy the corporation, then it just grows a new head. It's like Hydra, left to itself, it will just recreate itself. It will relabel itself. It will rebrand. It'll take a new name. It'll take a new form. And suddenly you'll have it right back in your midst. And so you wind up with this situation where what needs to be done is that if Serco won't stop funding this, then Serco needs to have the plug pulled. If the Federal Reserve won't stop funding this, then the Federal Reserve needs to go away. And if the Bank for International Settlements continues to let its members run wild like this, then it needs to go. These are corporations that are operating unlawfully, illegally, and immorally. And so they have no right to exist.
No, but if the Pope was in charge of the corporations and we don't have a Pope,
Right.
only a patriarch of the West.
Right.
So is there a big hole here that somehow needs to be addressed?
Well, it's an avoidance. It's a criminal avoidance is basically what it is. The Pope and the King have both took powder,
Mm-hmm.
and they are nowhere to be seen, and they are avoiding their offices that are responsible for this situation. And we've got these politicians out grandstanding and exercising their egos and spending money that they really don't have at our expense.
Well, if a contractor fails to uphold the contract, then we can mow our own lawn.
And we will. But the point is that these people are misrepresenting us. They're going out here bombing civilians in Russia and leaving the rest of the world to think that we're doing this. They're painting the big red X on our back. Okay? They are deliberately setting us up to be the fall guys where we will have to fight for our lives because they've set up a situation to profit themselves and have misrepresented their actions as our actions.
Yes, I definitely understand what you're saying, Anna, and I guess I'm just looking for a root solution to the problem.
Well, you just cut the electricity and go in and take the corporation's headquarters, period. You shut their doors, you root them out of their building, and you just send them down the road. That's how you take out a corporation. You don't have to, do anything more than to completely remove them from their facilities and their communications and just take their assets right away from them.
Did you hear from Rothschild?
Not yet, but I wasn't expecting any immediate response. At least the rest of the world can see that we offered them a peaceful means of getting out of the situation they've gotten themselves into.
A peaceful and honorable.
Right, exactly. But they don't want to admit that what they did was criminal. And so they're avoiding the entire subject. It's like, oh, well, we tried to steal this guy's money and, just ignore the fact that we had to pay him back and renegotiate the use of his funds. So now we don't want to admit there's anything to do. We just want to, um, somehow ride this out and steal the more assets from Russia or from somebody else and try to, make a brave front of this. Well, there's no brave front to be had. The rest of the world knows where the Marshall Plan money came from. Rothschild knows where the Marshall Plan money came from. So, there's really no point in trying to weasel around it. There's really no point in picking a fight with Russia and thinking that the Americans are going to come save them. I mean, meaning the corporations. The corporations need their heads screwed on. And as far as Rothschild is concerned, his entire operation is drowning in debt. All of his maritime commerce operations are so deep underwater, they will never see daylight, ever again. And it's because of this insurmountable debt and the fact that they have not had debt forgiveness in over 800 years that the entire banking system is what it is today. Banking is essentially a very simple business. With or without usury, it is still an extremely simple business. And yet they have managed to clog it up and mess it up to such a degree with their dishonesty and their corruption and their securitization fraud and their bankruptcy fraud and their impersonation fraud and everything else that they've done that's criminal and wrong, that it has completely lost its simple character. Banking should be so simple. I mean, the money goes in, the money comes out. At the end of the day, you settle the accounts. Everything balances, period. That's it. There shouldn't be any big mystery to this. And yet they have managed to pull every kind of nasty little scheme and control and coercion, fraud scheme, monopolies, transfer monopolies, everything that they can possibly do to make it complicated, to make it secretive, and to make it a, a good old boys club where they're pulling all this stuff behind closed doors in their own little secret society at the detriment of the entire world population, and they think that they have a right to do this, and they don't.
No, and they're just, putting the black magic money spell out there to confuse people and to, make them think that, oh, bankers are special. They have some special kind of magic that they can work in order to make money, and it's all just horse hooey.
It's so childish that it really has no place in the modern age, not in any form.
No, but people are seriously, it's
Well,
terrible.
they've been treated like rats in a trap. They have had a false dependency on a product, quote unquote, money, as a means of exchange. And, while this offers some advantages, there's nothing about it so special. And the fact is that our country, our government, is supposed to be issuing its own money at its own expense and for its own purposes at no interest whatsoever to itself. And instead, these corrupt and evil employees of ours have set things up so that we had to have a foreign bank come in here and issue these Federal Reserve notes for us and charge us up the wazoo for the honor of having them come in and do something that we could do for ourselves. Thank you so much, right? It's like paying someone to come in and wash your car, something that you could do yourself, or that you could arrange to pay for someone else to do, and charge you $500,000 for something that costs $20. You know, it has been an outrage, complete and utter travesty that this has gone on the way it has for as long as it has. And, the whole idea that these people have, that they are so special and that we should all be, bowing down as slaves to them over something that we can do ourselves is preposterous.
It sure is. And it just, I just hope that people really wake up and realize that you've been schnookered, baby.
Yes, well, I did as I was as explicit as I could. We've been swindled, you know, and uh, and then I went through and I showed you exactly how we've been swindled, and then I started the business of showing you different aspects of how we've been swindled. The fact that the seigniorage on the issuance of the currency was not returned to us. It was eaten up by the publishers. The fact that the debt notes were not removed from the system after having been exchanged once, so that every debt note receives more and more and more commodities and services in exchange for the same debt note, so that one $5 debt note suddenly garners what, 50,000 in goods and services that were never actually paid for?
Yes,
No?
and I think that was a big shock to me because I had never thought about it. I mean, I knew, you know, all of the other aspects, but the reuse of that and pulling those resources out of our economy, that was a big revelation for me.
Well, that's called asset stripping.
Exactly,
And that's what they've been doing for 160 years.
exactly.
And they owe us.
Big time. Big, big time.
Right. So that's the source of all the prepaid credit. It's the balance of the ledger. And as far as their CUSIP bonds, those are counterbalanced by the auto trust accounts. And we're calling for the auto trust accounts. We're saying, okay, bring forward both sides of the ledger, time to balance the freaking books, boys, and let's see how it all comes out. And I can already tell you how it comes out. It comes out wildly in our favor with wildly larger amounts of money that have been, or goods or services on our side than anything they ever provided to anyone, which is almost basically nothing.
Right. Really, not much. Yes. So, it's, you know, it's just a matter of reining this criminality in. And I'm still just waiting for someone to make an arrest. Go ahead, arrest them.
Well, a lot of the time it's because they don't have the traction to arrest someone. I'm sure that Donald Trump would love to arrest Joe Biden. But the problem is that rigging a straw poll is not illegal. It's that simple. All this talk about, rigging the election, blah, 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 blah. It's not an election, folks.
The popular vote.
It's a straw poll. It's just a popularity contest.
Right.
It has no standing as a public election. It's a private straw poll election conducted by political parties, which are lobbyist groups. Okay, this would be like Procter and Gamble and Bristol Myers corporations going head to head with two toothpastes, okay, and having a huge frou-frou-rah for the public to vote on which toothpaste do you like, which brand do you like better. And, say that we spent a cool $5 billion on this burning question. Would it still have any credibility or any power or any result, or would it really matter? And would it be something actionable if somebody got in there and tweaked the data so that, you know, one brand of toothpaste won over another brand of toothpaste in the popular opinion poll? No, it's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. The idea that these private corporate elections are our public elections, that's ridiculous. And the idea that there was election fraud of any real public election having any real meaning or result is equally ridiculous. We have never elected these presidential positions in these corporations. Americans have nothing to say about that. Those are foreign corporations. And so we have never been allowed to elect their presidents. Okay, we're talking now about corporation presidents. We're talking about CEOs. If you look up the legal meaning of president, you will see that a president is the CEO of a company. It's the chief executive officer of a company or corporation. Okay, that's what a president is. And those separate foreign subcontractors of ours have their own foreign corporations. They have their own foreign elections. And they've foisted their own foreign corporations off as if they were our public elections. But they're not. If you look into it and you look into the constitutions and you look into the laws surrounding all of this, you will see that not a single one of those presidents have ever been elected by popular vote or acclamation.
No, it's the Electoral College.
The Electoral College, which is an independent foreign body, gets to choose who's going to be president of the US and who's going to be president of the USA. And for a number of years, from 1937 until, say, 2015, somewhere in there, these two corporations, the US Inc. and the USA Inc., were colluding together so that they vested the presidency of both those corporations in one man. Okay, so you see, for example, Jimmy Carter operating as the president of the United States one day and operating as the president of the United States of America Incorporated the next day. And this was made possible by a declaration agreement that was made between these two corporations in 1937 called the
Declaration of Interdependence. Yeah.
of the governments in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we have copies of that agreement for sale on our website. You can get your own copy of the whole thing, complete with signatures. And you can see that these two colluding foreign corporations, one municipal, one territorial, they got together and they combined their resources and colluded together against their employers. And now what you're seeing is that they've had differences of opinion because they have different contractual obligations and different amounts of pressure are being applied to them at different points by other forces, so that they're being forced apart. That old collusion isn't working anymore, and they're all kind of, trying to cover their own butts, and they're all kind of looking over their shoulder, wondering what's going to happen when the American people finally wake up and go, oh my God. These are nothing but commercial corporations in the business of providing governmental services, and they've been running roughshod over us and snookering us and substituting their private corporate elections for our public elections for 160 years. And so here, here's Donald Trump. Oh yeah, the election was stolen. I would have won. Well, he probably would have. And now I don't know anybody who voted for Joe Biden. I literally don't. And I have asked a whole bunch of friends who were rampant Democrats, and they never even voted for him. So, I mean, what does that say? Joe Biden didn't even campaign. Okay, he didn't campaign at all. Remember? He was hiding in his basement the entire time. There is no way, no way that Joe Biden won any kind of election, popular or otherwise. And yet, it does not matter, because the election that was held was just a straw poll. The public saw a straw poll. The public, not me, because I've been voted ever since I realized what was going on, which is many years ago. But everybody who voted in that election just voted in a straw poll, which has no meaning, which has no force, no lawful result, nothing. There's nothing to base a complaint on, because it wasn't really an election. The actual election took place when members of the Electoral College cast their votes in each of two separate elections, one for the US Incorporated and one for the USA Incorporated. Now, the important point to get to is that neither one of these corporations are supposed to be doing any of this. And they are not supposed to be presenting this as if this was the government, our United States of America, our United States. And they've gotten away in part because, number one, they never add the word incorporated to let people know that we're talking about commercial corporations. Okay, they just gloss it over. And they never actually tell people that, okay, well, we're a foreign corporation in the business of providing governmental services. And so that's who we are. No, they deliberately promote the misunderstanding and deceit so that people assume, oh, well, that's the United States of America. That's the Federation of States. No, it's not. Or they think, oh, that's the United States. That's the Union States. No, it's not. These are nothing but foreign corporations that have deceptively and abusively misused our names, impersonated us, and stolen our identity. That's what they are. They're foreign subcontractors that have usurped against the actual government of this country. And they've done it for their own profit for a long, long time. Now, let me tell you, they've used every kind of deceit and manipulative trick in the book. One of the things that is most common for people to misunderstand is they misrepresent a Confederate state, which is actually a state of state, as if it were one of our states. And it's not. A Confederate state, also known as a state of state, is a business organization that works for a state. Okay? So a Confederate state isn't a state. Remember that, it's important. They constantly gain mileage by misrepresenting their state of state organizations as actual states when they're not. Okay? Another thing that has gone into this gigantic fraud is basically a stylistic change, an official stylistic change that took place in 1851. Early on, our very first president of the American subcontractor, known as the Federal Republic, which has been dormant since 1861. The original president of that organization was George Washington. And when he took office, he took office as the president, capital T, H, E, the, definite article, upper lowercase, president of the United States. And the United States was spelled with small the, indefinite article, which was appropriate because at that point, the Federal Republic was doing business as the United States, and the municipal government was doing business as the United States, which was simply, at that point, the city of Washington, D.C. So for many years, the president of the Republic was known as the President of the United States, small the, on the United States. Then in 1851, because of the confusions that result between having two entities named the same or very similar names, they came forward and said, well, the official language of this country is English. and therefore you should use English styles and English nomenclature, and it should be a capital T on the when referring to the Union States. Fair enough, right? If English is our official language, then we should be using English nomenclature, and we should use English style, and we should use English grammar. So in 1851, there was a change. But when it came to the office of the President of the United States, there was no change. The name of the country changed, but not the name of the office.
Why is that?
Because by that point, the municipal government was using that name and had used that name under Roman civil law since 1790. So they retained the Roman nomenclature, and the presidency of the United States, the only difference you can tell the difference was that the Federal Republic presidency used a capital T on the president, and then it was of the United States, small the on the United States. And the municipal government used small the for both the president and the United States. As a result of this, the municipal government has been consistently misconstrued and misidentified as the office, as having the office of the presidency. Remember, the presidency of the American Federation, I should say the American Federation is separate. It's completely, it's out here in the realm of companies, not corporations. And the Federal Republic presidency was vacated very shortly thereafter. So there was nothing left that was called the President of the United States except the municipal office, and they simply usurped against the Federal Republic and the Federation of States.
And you can't tell by just saying it. You'd have to actually see it in print.
Right. And even then, there would be confusion.
Yeah, depending on where you were in time.
Depending on where you were in time, and also depending on how exacting the typist and when the entire entity, the identity of an entity hangs on whether you capitalize the definite article or don't. It's just far too easy to slip up one way or another and have a completely different end result.
Right. Yeah.
So you see, they've made all the hay they can make by misinterpreting and misidentifying the municipal presidential office as the Federal Republic office, and also the Federation office. And both of those offices have been vacant for many years because the Federal Republic didn't have the oversight of the Confederation. The Confederation lost its place because of the lack of a quorum to conduct business. And the Federation, though it has existed and has continued to this day, was attacked by the Union Army. And I want something else to be said here. There's all sorts of duplicitous wordplay that goes on. It's not just the stylistic changes. It's not just was the definite article capitalized or not. There's more. There are more word plays and more things that are confused deliberately in order to promote fraud and corruption. People think of the Union Army. Well, which Union are they talking about? Are they talking about the British Union? Or are they talking about our Union of States? Again, you can't tell just by saying it. And in this case, you can't even tell by looking at it. You could only discern it from the context. And this has been a consistent practice of confusing their government with our government, with impersonating our government, with substituting itself for our government, by, substituting offices, their private corporate offices for our public offices. Playing this incredibly sneaky, dishonest, purposeful wordsmithing fraud so as to misidentify us and to usurp upon our government. And this has been going on straight on for 160 years. So you can imagine, even the perpetrators get confused.
Yes, it's true. It's very true. And we do see that occur on a regular basis where, a lot of times they're just kind of, not really sure who I am and where I am and what I am. And
Well, what do you think, Terry? I think that Donald Trump is 100% honest in his belief. Number one, that there was an election that was actionable. And number two, that it was stolen from him.
I think Trump is too smart. I think he's playing both sides.
Well, there's no doubt he's playing both sides. He's the president of the USA Inc., right? So,
Yeah.
but I'm saying I think he actually believes that there was an election and that he was defrauded as the candidate in that election. And he thinks that it's something more than a straw poll. He thinks that it has actual standing so that you could go to a court and complain about this and have traction. Otherwise, why would he spend all this time, all this money, all this airtime, all this hours and hours, and all these people, Sidney Powell and Mike Flynn and all these people that have so loyally brought forward this issue when all of them want to know better.
Exactly. That's my point. I just think it's Roman bread and circus.
Well, it certainly is, because it's totally useless for us to sit around and even engage these conversations that people are having, wondering to the depths of their soul why this treasonous act has not been uh, addressed and why people aren't going to jail over it. They would be going to jail if it were an actual, election that meant anything. But as it is, it's just a straw poll, a popularity poll that's private, that is sponsored by two lobbyist groups. And so there's no law, there is no election law that actually properly applies to that.
Yes, and I think that's the main point that you've been trying to drive home. And I thought it was pretty clear in your articles because the point is that you're just stirring the pot without a spoon, basically.
I mean, you're, you're, you're trying to make this into a big issue of election fraud when in fact the election wasn't an election. And that's the other fraud. That's the other underlying, the greater fraud.
Right. Well, that's the problem here. There is fraud on top of fraud on top of fraud on top of fraud. It just doesn't seem to end.
Well, and look at, we had the article this week about Regulation Z.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yes.
hope and pray to God that enough people read that to finally understand Regulation Z and why we had to have a Regulation Z. Essentially, they came through and they wrote up their state regulations such that everybody had to register their car as a motor vehicle and had to get a driver license. These represent two lies. I can pretty much guarantee that 95% of the people listening to this broadcast tonight are not drivers, and they are not using their car as a motor vehicle engaged in commerce, resulting in private profit from the use of public roads. Okay, so basically, they were forcing people to lie about themselves and their activity, and also forcing them to lie about their private automobile and what they were using their automobile for. Two biggies. And the people were being coerced to tell this big lie against themselves and against their car without any remuneration or any kind of there was nothing offered for this. This was just an arbitrary thing that they came through and they said, okay, well, now everybody has to register their car as a motor vehicle, even though you're not engaged in commerce. And by definition, a motor vehicle is engaged in commerce. Okay, so you have to lie about this. And if you're going to register your car and you aren't actually engaged in commerce, you also have to lie about yourself if you get a driver license and you're not engaged in commerce for profit. Okay? Okay, so the Federal Reserve goes, well, the actual reason that they were doing this was so that they could claim an ownership interest in your private car. And having claimed an ownership interest in your private car by registration again, which, as I've told you, always gives up an ownership interest in whatever you're registering, including your babies, they realized, okay, well, we want to glom on to all of these private cars as collateral backing our debts. Okay, this is why they're doing it. They're forcing you to register your car as a motor vehicle so that they have a public interest claim to own your car. And once they own it, they can insure it and they can lay claim to it, they can seize it, they can impound it, on top of which they get to use it as collateral. The value of your car can be used as collateral for them to borrow against. So they were basically engaged in a scheme to steal your car when they forced you to register it. And they were also engaged in a scheme to mischaracterize it as a motor vehicle. And as part of that, then they also had to mischaracterize you as a driver, which is a professional involved, a licensed professional engaged in commerce, making money privately for themselves off the use of public resources, the roads.
Yeah, it's just crazy. But of course, none of that is you or your car because they're using the person and trafficking the person, just merely dragging the person around wherever they want to take it, you know?
However, since you are not a driver, at least not knowingly are you a driver ever, um, and because your private car actually is your property and not something belonging to the government, and isn't actually a motor vehicle, they had to force you to lie in order to bring you into their scheme. And in order to subject you and your car both to their code, okay? But they had to provide remedy for this. Okay, they couldn't just come in because that would be theft and stealing and fraud and all sorts of other things. It would be suborning false witness. It would be enjoining to conspire and fraud. It would be all sorts of things. Okay, so they had to provide remedy for this. They had to give you an out. They had to give you an exemption to hold you harmless for lying and falsifying a public record and for registering your car as a motor vehicle when it's not a motor vehicle. So they came up with Regulation Z. And that's what Regulation Z is. It's the remedy for them forcing you to lie about yourself and your activities and lie about your car and what you're doing with your car so that they could seize control of your use of the roads, your ability to travel. And they could also use your private property as collateral for them to borrow against. They've been engaged in theft by deceit, fraud, conspiracy to defraud. Anyway, the only way that they could legalize their automobile registration statutes was by providing this remedy. So they did. They had no choice. They still have no choice. If they don't provide Z plates and Z tags to the public as remedy for what they've forced people to do, to exempt you and hold you harmless from their scheme and exempt your property and hold it on harmless from their scheme, then they have recriminalized the registration statutes. It's that simple. If they don't provide you with remedy, they are committing crime. So that's the whole thing about Regulation Z, and the faster that all these would-be junior woodchuck state of state legislature members understand that and understand that they are culpable for this, then the sooner the issues surrounding the licensing of drivers and the ownership of automobiles and the use of automobiles and the proper law that must be applied to all of the above will get straightened out. I suggest everybody who's concerned about the right to travel, everybody who is concerned about the corporations' false claims of ownership interest in you and your car and your activities, everybody who is concerned about the loss of freedom that this represents and the basic underlying fraud and falsehood that has been imposed upon Americans by a employee organization. Everybody should get that article about Regulation Z, the international public notice about Regulation Z, under the noses of as many state of state legislatures and as many Congress members as possible.
And you also provided the Highway Safety Act that was the source, right?
Yeah, well, this was all going back in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
This was right after the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And Eisenhower, as you recall, was dead set that we were going to have a huge federal highway system, the interstate system, remember? This is when they began that rampage of actually, mapping out these huge, and I do mean huge, utility corridors, right across America and right between all the major cities, and building these gigantic 4 and 6 lane highways, uh, and just all the federal highways were now, going into hyperdrive with the interstate system, right? And they needed money. So they hit upon this scheme to register all the private cars and trucks in America as public property and use them as collateral to borrow against in order to build all these roads and bridges and everything else that went into the federal highway, quote unquote, fund, which was used to fund the federal interstate system. And here you have it. Everybody paid through the nose once again, while our employees skated around freely and bilked everyone and, suborned people to testify against themselves and against their better interest, and suborned people to lie about the use of their cars so that their car became designated as a motor vehicle. All of this crap, just absolutely insulting to anyone's intelligence once you understand what the definition of a motor vehicle is and know the history of this particular law and series of laws, and know what they were driving at. They were just driving at snatching your assets from you and using it for their benefit so that they could build these big projects, which they considered to be for the public good, and maybe they were to an extent, but were actually things that they should have funded out of their corporate profits, not out of your pockets.
So it's more crime.
More crime. And if they don't provide the correct remedy, if they don't provide the Z plates, if they don't give you your exemption, if they don't recognize that your car is not actually, wink, wink, a motor vehicle, if they don't recognize the fact that you aren't really, wink, wink, a driver, then they are recriminalizing the automobile registration statutes, both federal and state of state.
I think those are the magic words that would need to be included in the notice to the legislative representatives.
Well, this needs to get put in front of their little chubby faces and pert noses as quickly as possible if you all want to put an end to it.
Okay, well, that sounds great. So there's more noticing to be done. And this comes on the heels of the notice to the attorneys and doctors and politicians, and the notice to the hospitals, and now notice to the legislature representatives for Regulation Z.
Well, and you need to get this in front of the police, because even though they aren't our police, even though they are not our peacekeeping officers, they are at risk because they're going around enforcing all this BS. And they need to know it's BS, and they need to know why it's BS, and they need to step back and go, oh, well, we really do need to, provide these Z plates, because otherwise we're out here on the highway and we don't know who's who.
Well, not only the police, the troopers and sheriffs, anybody who pulls you over.
Right, anybody who is engaged in any kind of activity arresting you on the highways or public roads, either one, needs to know what your actual use of the road is, and the fact that you're not actually a motor vehicle, and no, you're not actually a driver.
And you're not in commerce.
you're not engaged in any kind of commerce.
What did
So you're
you
not
what did you call it? You called it intercourse with commerce, right?
commercial intercourse. That's what they call it in all of their statutes, and all their regs and regulations are miles high. And the thing is, we're seeing this same sort of blind uh, they don't, just like with the election, they're all concentrated on these election statutes and everything, right? But it doesn't count because it wasn't really an election. It wasn't a public election, so it doesn't mean anything, and it isn't actionable. All the fraud isn't actionable. Same thing with this. Um, the courts look at the statutes and they say, okay, well, it says you're supposed to be licensed as a driver and you're supposed to register your car. So therefore, you didn't do this and you're guilty. Boom. So they hit people with all these fines and fees and even jail time over these issues. And they never really look at whether the regulation or the law or the statute is valid and what it needs to be valid. It needs to have Regulation Z honored and to have those Z plates accessible and to have the records of the individual people amended so that they are identified not as drivers but as travelers. They need to provide the remedy, otherwise they're committing crime on a grand scale and they don't even know it. They don't know this. They don't look at it. They don't study it. Okay. And if you don't bring it to their attention and shove it under their nose and up their butts, then they're just going to sit there and, merrily collect the revenue for the king. And you're going to be out your freedom and your property and your good name.
Yes, thank you for that, Anna. Um, Boy, it just, there's just so many layers to this. And I think that is part of the challenge is when people finally do understand the dead baby scam, because you've been talking about it now for 10 years. I mean, long time. Publicly, on your blog. Your blog started in 2014. And so then once they get their arms around the birth certificate fraud, well, any way you turn every aspect of your life has this fraud and criminality applied to it. And it's just so big, enormous. And, people are now starting to, move in that direction because they understand the dead baby scam and the birth certificate fraud. And they're just like, holy cow, this is just, it's everything. Everywhere I turn, everything that has touched my life has been tainted with fraud.
Right. Yes, it's a world-spanning fraud.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crime cabal and criminal organizations that are for-profit corporations. And they all derive from the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company. That's the ultimate source. The European branches of those two corporations are what we're dealing with as the source of the problem today.
Right. And those two corporations magically disappeared over the horizon
Yes,
somehow.
just after they committed a huge insurance fraud.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Well, jeez, that was tiring.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No. Um, so what else do you want to cover tonight?
So I would like everybody, what we're dealing with are meat and potatoes issues like Regulation Z, like taking a stance against violence and the use of American resources to do horrible things. And, we're dealing with a lot of meat and butter here, but take a little time out and expand your vision of yourself this week. Because at the end of the day, we are literally the value underlying the creation. This was done for us. We were created for this. It's an utterly symbiotic and interconnected relationship between us, this planet, and everything that is here for us to perceive and learn from. And, ultimately, our destiny is to overcome ignorance, fear, idolatry, violence, and it's not exactly stupidity, but lack of focus and awareness.
And sloth and greed.
Right. But in terms of actually valuing things, we have to find the value in ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we have to find the value in everyone else and in everything else before we'll really understand and really get away from the idolatry and limitations of money.
Well, the truth is we don't really need money. You've explained over and over and over again that it's only a representation of value. It kind of makes things handy in a way, but we don't need it. We absolutely don't need it. We can just, you know, see the value in each other, see the value in our world, see the value in our neighborhood, our community, and operate from that level.
Well, and I'm not adverse to getting back to that. That is the way we should be acting. It bypasses the idolatry and it bypasses the fraud. Because if you think about it, money is like a photograph of an apple being misrepresented as an apple.
Exactly. And it's still idolatry because it's not real. It's not an apple.
Right. It's not an apple. It's not a Mercedes Benz. It's not an oak tree. It's just an image. Now, I shouldn't be downplaying images since I'm an image myself talking to you through another image. But whatever value there is vested in us and in this world of ours, the natural world, the earth. It's not vested in a facsimile of the earth, okay? It's not vested in fraud schemes. It's not vested in pieces of paper. It's vested in something much higher, much cleaner, much more truthful than that.
And much more valuable than
And
that.
yes, exactly. So, next time you're hungry and you eat an apple, consider the ridiculousness of eating a photograph of an apple.
That's a good way to think of it. It's like, but I mean, we were talking about this on one of your coordinator trainings too. There's that YouTube out there where a guy has a bar of silver and a Hershey bar. He asks people, which one do you want? I can give you the silver bar, or I can give you this cold Hershey bar. Everybody takes the Hershey bar.
Maybe they're super hungry. I don't know. If they had any sense, they'd realize that they could walk into a precious metals exchange and get, 10 Hershey bars for the same price. But
Yeah, I think the little silver ingot was worth $100 or something.
oh, really? Well, anyway, if they had any common sense and they weren't super hungry, they would have taken the $100 silver ingot over a $2 Hershey bar. The problem is, and I just want to observe this kind of as a snarky comment, is that when you're really hungry, you really couldn't care less about the silver bar. You really will go for the Hershey bar every time.
It's true. And then the question is, are you really hungry? Are you sure you're hungry?
Yeah, people kind of miss the point. They get all wound up. I had a comment here, and we're going through all this stuff with the banks, and I had this comment that I had a couple of comments that really really amused me. Um, people are asking about exchanging their Federal Reserve notes for AFD uh, gold currency, and I'm sitting there. They're still thinking of it in terms of the Federal Reserve notes have value. They don't realize that Federal Reserve notes have less than no value. And they don't realize that our interest in Federal Reserve notes is for recoupment back to the people who've been abused, who've been defrauded. The only reason we want Federal Reserve notes is so that we have some sort of record of how many Federal Reserve notes got turned in versus a standardized value of gold. It's so that we can give value back to people. It's not to take any value in. Anyway, people are still struggling with that concept. And really it's quite simple. Over time, the value of what represents value changes. And it doesn't matter whether it's an asset-backed currency or a fiat debt note. The relative value of these things engaged in a market changes over time. Now, already back in 1910, when the latest round of Federal Reserve note scam got started, they knew for sure that every time in world history that we have tried to use a fiat currency, that currency has reliably, 100% of the time, imploded either through deflation or hyperinflation. We know the death knell of the fiat currency systems. Okay, we knew that way back. So there was no question in the minds of the bankers when they set up the Federal Reserve note that it was going to die and that they would have some influence on whether it died by deflation or hyperinflation. But either way, they knew it was going to die at some point in the future. And they knew that it was going to devalue. It would devalue gradually but consistently over time until it hit zero and then went as a debt. All right? So this was already known in 1910. We're just, playing along as the pawns in the game. So now the Federal Reserve note is less than worthless, really, because of all the debt attached to it, right? And all of the multiple iterations that each note has gone through. I mean, it's an unimaginable debt, okay? But people still think that it has value. And I'm telling you right now, to your faces, no, it does not. And it never did. The only value that the Federal Reserve note ever had was based on the forced exchange of actual silver dollars for Federal Reserve notes that took place in 1934 when they published the Emergency Banking Act, which was basically their emergency, not ours. And they said, well, we'll give you this IOU, and each IOU, each $1 IOU, will arbitrarily be equal to one silver dollar. And just like everything else, they came through and they forced this on people. They created a legal tender law and they attempted to legalize this, and they then did this exchange in which we gave them all our silver in exchange for their IOUs. And that is the only thing that ever gave the Federal Reserve note any value whatsoever. And we were the ones that gave it value by giving them something of actual physical value in exchange for it. So the original published exchange rate was 1-for-1. One United States silver dollar for one Federal Reserve note, IOU. If you go back over time, how much is it worth? How much change has there been for that one invested United States silver dollar to today? Well, the calculations are pretty complex because we've had rises and declines and rises and declines and rises and declines. And every time there was a rise or a decline, the overall value of the Federal Reserve note declined to nothing. And then it went, okay, right off the cliff because of all the iterations and the retrades on it. That, by the way, is called a derivative. Okay. They call it a derivative in the securities markets and in the mortgage markets, but it's actually a derivative in the currency markets too. Anyway, here we are. We have 1/10 ounce of pure gold, which is currently selling at, I don't know, $250. So this 1/10 of an ounce is worth 250 Federal Reserve notes. And as the Federal Reserve notes decline in value, as the market itself peters out and people realize, oh, and they try to get rid of all of these Federal Reserve notes. And the banks, of course, are trying to collect them because they're evidence not only of debt, but of crime, okay? As this process happens, what continues to go up in value? The value of gold and silver continues to go up, right? It's a balancing effect. It's a one goes up as the other goes down. So we give you an AFD, which is $250 of gold in exchange for what? One increasingly worthless Federal Reserve note. And why on earth would we do this? Because back there in 1934, you, or rather your parents and grandparents, were cheated. So what we're really doing here is exchanging value for value, compensating for the loss of the value that your money endured through this long, long process of degradation via the fiat money system. That's why. It's an attempt to hold you harmless based on the quote unquote investment that your great grandparents and parents made in 1934. I know, isn't it sad? All those good, honest people coerced by their own employees. People like Derek Johnson imagining that this country and these people ever gave any foreign president of a mere commercial corporation or municipal corporation executive power to issue executive orders to the populace and to order, uh, you know, emergency powers. Where have our children been misled about this? When did we stop thinking? What difference is there between a president of a commercial company acting as a dictator and somebody like Joseph Stalin acting as a dictator? And where is there any word, any mention anywhere in any constitution about emergency powers? I can tell you right off the bat, having read all these documents for years, I can tell you that there is not a single whisper about emergency powers anywhere in any constitution. This was just something they made up and granted to themselves. But no, they have no emergency powers, and executive orders were something that Abraham Lincoln started out of the clear blue with Executive Order, it's called General Order 100, aka the Lieber Code, which he issued the day before he bankrupted the states of America, which were engaged in the Civil War.
But it was a corporate entity.
It was a foreign corporate entity that he was president of that he bankrupted.
Yep.
At public expense. But what public? It wasn't our states, nor our states of states that went bankrupt. It was the British territorial entities that went bankrupt, their franchises that went bankrupt. That's also the source of the vaunted debt. You have all these deluded people wandering around telling you about all the debt that we incurred to King George, for example. What they fail to understand is this. When the War of Independence happened, the Americans went one way and the Brits went the other. They took different paths. The Tories ran home to mama and said, oh, well, dear King George, most illustrious and illuminated leader, blah, 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 your flip-flop is the spoon of the poor kind of thing, and asked for King George to loan them money to fight us. So King George said, oh, great, my loyal colonists are going to fight for me. I will grant you all sorts of loans at low interest and a long repayment term. And you can go ahead and you can have all this money, and I will give you arms, and I will send you Hessian soldiers, and I will do everything I can to support the efforts of my brave territorials in the New World. So George sent them a packet load of money. Okay, so here are the Tories over here fighting for King George against their American loyalist neighbors. They are getting cannon from King George. They're getting ammunition from King George. They're getting garrison soldiers from King George. And they are acquiring a huge debt from King George because they are using money from King George to fight us right here and now. That is the debt that was owed to King George by the USA, British USA Incorporated. So it wasn't us who owed the money to King George. It was the Tories that owed the money to King George. And it was the British version of USA Inc., or USA at that time, it was still a company, that incurred this huge debt that the central bankers then tried to parlay into an issue against our government, and which Andrew Jackson paid off. So no, folks, we didn't owe any huge debt to King George. Any debt that we owed to King George was zeroed out, except for a very small amount of money that was owed basically for transit fees to establish commercial contracts. So you have to keep it straight in your mind. Which United States are you talking about? Which United States of America are you talking about? Are you talking about an unincorporated thing, or are you talking about an incorporated thing? Is it British or is it American? Terry, you look very depressed.
I'm not.
Good.
No, not at all. I've been working hard out in the yard and trying to put in a new garden, so lots of hoeing, lots of shoveling, lots of rock moving, that type of thing.
I just want to reassure everybody, no, we Americans are just fine. We're awash in immense amounts of credit that's owed to us, and it's all prepaid. It's nothing to pay back. We have vast amounts of gold that's owed to us, vast amounts of silver that's owed to us, plus the mining interests in silver and gold in the ground. So we're in fine shape, but we do need to speak up. We do need to get our status straight. We do need to take on the fraud, and we do need to exercise our freedoms and our rights, because there are many self-interested criminals that would like to deprive us of this. So pass the word. Get your elbow out there. Hey, George, let's see, do you want to be okay? Do you want to be well off? You want to have some of your dreams come true? You want to be paid back for all the stuff you were skinned out of?
Yes. But you got to understand what's been done before you can, really wrap your arms around it. And I started the webinar by saying that, you know, this work requires constant study, but just as much as we have to learn, there's an equal amount we have to unlearn.
Right. Yeah, like the assumption that we came out of the War of Independence heavily indebted to King George. No, that wasn't us. That was the other British version of United States of America. Just like we've had people go around and say, oh yeah, the British won the war. No, they didn't. They didn't come close to winning the war. And it took us 8 long years to win it. Okay, no, the British did not win the War of Independence. What the British won were some important concessions, but they were just concessions. And they are implemented and elucidated and enumerated in the constitutions themselves. So there's no mystery. They did not win the war just simply because they where that rumor got started was people started reading the definitive Treaty of Peace, Paris 1783, in which King George is referred to as the Prince of the United States of America, again, the British United States of America, and Arch Treasurer thereof. And that should give you a clue right there that they're talking about a business organization. They're not talking about our Federation of States. They're not talking about our government at all. That entire particular Treaty of Paris is a sea jurisdiction treaty concerned with trade, and it's only the only reference in that entire document to us is part of a one-liner in which King George himself calls us the free, sovereign, and independent states of America. That's it. The only reference to us in the entire definitive Treaty of Paris 1783 is that. Okay? All the rest of that stuff is about their version of United States of America, which pre-existed the war. And our version also pre-existed the war. So try to keep it straight and think about the context of what you're reading. Because if you don't, you can come to completely erroneous conclusions, like buying the BS that we owed a whole bunch of money to King George when we didn't. Like buying the BS that we lost the War of Independence. We didn't. Our peace treaty is under the Treaty of Versailles. It's not under the Treaty of Paris. Anyway, just kind of trying to grab everybody and don't spread these rumors that we somehow lost the War of Independence or that we somehow owed King George all this money. I'll tell you who owes a bunch of money. King George and his progeny and descendants and successors owe the American Indian tribes a whole hell of a lot of money. Because after they were unable to fulfill their treaty obligations to the Lenape and the Delaware, they skated off into the horizon and conveniently forgot that they were obligated to pay off their treaty agreement in gold.
Convenient.
Right. King George knew he owed it to the Indians, but he wasn't going to pay it. He wasn't going to step up and offer. He wasn't that honorable a man, and he didn't have the gold. So he just, made off like a bandit. Didn't even stop to wave goodbye to the Indians who had placed their good faith in the great white father over the waters, and who had given them a solemn promise that the colonists would not go beyond the Cumberland Gap. Well, I'd say they went a long way beyond the Cumberland Gap, and George and his administrative officers tried to excuse that circumstance as the fortunes of an unfortunate war. And it sure was unfortunate for the Indians, because suddenly George was free of the leash and could could make the excuse that, oh, he couldn't keep the treaty because he lost the war and there was a new government and the new government was horrible. And he just couldn't be sad enough about this entire circumstance. And please forgive us for not being able to, hold the line against these horrible American colonists who've broken from the mother country and created such a terrible and destructive war for over 8 years. And you can see how we've suffered and tried our best to keep our treaty obligations to the Lenape and the Delaware people. But even though we're obligated to, we're not going to pay you in gold for ripping you off and letting the colonists rampage through the Cumberland Gap and into all the land beyond. We wouldn't think of it. We're Brits. And we're engaged in a fight with Napoleon, trying to scrap him and his country and throw it under the bus right now. So, just damned inconvenient, folks. Bye. That's how it went. But it doesn't mean they still don't owe the Lenape and the Delaware.
Right? It's documented. You've got the evidence.
Yes. And they owe the other tribes too, because they were equally damaged. So all of that needs to be spread out and all of that needs to be considered, and everybody needs to think some more about, just how mammoth these debts are and what's actually owed, not just to our country, but all the countries that were impacted by this fraud scheme and by little lapses like that. You'll notice that the government of Spain, after the Spanish-American War, paid off its treaties with gold and placed it in a trust, the Guadalupe Hidalgo Trust. 33 trillion in gold. Now it's probably more like worth probably, I haven't looked recently, but probably 60 trillion in gold that the Spanish government set aside to settle its treaty debts and its bonds. They were honorable.
Well, we sure have walked all around the world today, haven't we?
Well, that's what you get when you get to come to grips with your fiduciary who spends her time primarily in international jurisdiction.
Right. Well, we also went into the internal world and the higher world, so I think we've got our bases covered for the night.
Right. Well, there's a little article about that called "You" in quotation marks are a photon particle matrix that explains more about the science and the implications of that science as we go forward.
I love it. I love that stuff. You know that, Anna.
Yeah, and on a better day, and once all this other stuff gets settled, we'll have some really wonderful discussions, I'm sure.
Definitely, definitely. Right. Well, we got some big high points coming up for sure.
Good night, Terry. Good
Good
night,
night, Anna.
everybody. Keep on
Thank
the
you.
sunny side of the street.
Thank you for all that wonderful information and have a great week and enjoy the sun in Alaska.
I will. I'm going to take my own advice. I'm going to be on the sunny side of the street 100%.